Assalamu alaikum. This is the Advanced Macroeconomic Theory course directed to fourth year economics section. Let's now take the effectiveness of fiscal policy in ISLM model. In this lecture, we will take the effects of fiscal policy in ISLM model. We know that the tools of fiscal policy is government expenditure and taxes. The effectiveness of fiscal policy depends on the slope of IS curve, which is 1 minus B over H. 1 minus B, it is marginal propensity to save. H, it is investment sensitivity to interest rates. And the slope of LM curve, which is K over M. K, money sensitivity to income, and M, money sensitivity to interest rates. This policy will find in the last part of this lecture that it would be most effective, the fiscal policy would be most effective when IS curve is vertical and LM curve is horizontal. Starting by an expansionary fiscal policy, which means that either government expenditure would increase or taxes would decrease, or government expenditure and taxes would increase together by the same percentage. Let's assume that the starting point is at E naught, where IS naught and LM naught are intersect. At this point, the equilibrium interest rate would be R naught, the equilibrium national income Y naught, assuming that the government decides to increase government expenditure. In this case, IS curve would shift from IS naught to IS1. The initial impact of this expansionary fiscal policy is increasing the national income from Y naught to Y1. We call this the full multiplier effect, and the full multiplier value in this case measured by 1 over 1 minus B. This is the value of multiplier times the amount of government expenditure that is increased by the government. So, movement from E naught to E1, it is the initial impact of the expansionary fiscal policy. But at E1, we have equilibrium in goods market because it is a point on IS curve. But E1, it is not an equilibrium in money market. It is located to the right of LM, so we have excess demand for money in money market. This excess demand would put upward pressure on interest rate till we reach to E2. In order to restore equilibrium in money market, interest rate should increase. In this case, private investment would decrease. The induced private investment would decrease. We call it crowding out effect. So the final impact of expansionary fiscal policy is the increase in equilibrium national income from Y naught to Y2. And here, national income would increase by government multiplier in ISLM model. This value of multiplier is lower than the full multiplier effect because we have a term, we call it crowding out effect term, HK over M. When this part or when this term is increasing, the effectiveness of fiscal policy would be decreased. يعني أنا عندي البارت بتاع ال crowding out effect اللي هو HK over M. كل ما يكون البارت ده أو الترم ده قيمته كبيرة، ده معناها إن ال fiscal policy is ineffective. ineffective في إيه؟ إن هي مش هتزود الناشونال income الزيادة الكاملة. يعني أنا بقارن ما بين ال full multiplier value اللي هو الزيادة المفروض تحصل من الناشونال income نتيجة زيادة ال government expenditure اللي هي من Y naught ل Y1. لقينا إن الفاينل increase in national income according to this graph is from Y naught to Y2. ده نتيجة للcrowding out effect. فكل ما الcrowding out effect يكون قليل ده معناه إن fiscal policy is more effective. لما يكون crowding out effect is high ده معناه إن أنا fiscal policy is ineffective. assuming that the marginal propensity to consume is small, B has a small value, and investment is more sensitive to interest rate, which is H is high. In this case, we have low slope of IS curve. The IS curve is more flatter than before, and applying an expansionary fiscal policy would cause IS curve would shift rightward from IS0 to IS1. The initial impact of this expansionary fiscal policy is the increase in equilibrium national income from Y0 to Y1, but the final increase in equilibrium national income is only the distance between Y0 to Y2. This is due to high crowding out effect. When the investment is more sensitive to interest rate, we have high crowding out effect. In this case, the final change in equilibrium national income would be relatively small. In this case, the fiscal policy is less effective. Okay, لما أنا بتكلم على effectiveness of fiscal policy, effectiveness على equilibrium national income. المفروض لما government بتطبق expansionary fiscal policy هي عايزة national income يزيد. فالمفترض إن national income يزيد من Y0 ل Y1. ده بنسميه full multiplier effect. That the actual and the final increase in equilibrium national income is only from Y0 to Y2. This is due to high crowding out effect. Crowding out هو بيتقاس بالterm HK over M. كل ما value of H is high بلاقي إن crowding out effect would be increasing, and this made the fiscal policy to be less effective on the national income. Let's consider the second case when IS curve is relatively steeper than before. This is due to the high value of marginal propensity to consume, or when investment is less sensitive to interest rate. In this case, when we calculate the crowding out effect term, which is HK over M, we find that it has a small value than before, and when we calculate the government expenditure multiplier in ISLM model, we will find the value is higher than before. Graphically, the starting point where at E0, the government decides to apply an expansionary fiscal policy by increasing government expenditure. IS curve would shift rightward from IS0 to IS1. The initial impact of this expansionary fiscal policy is increasing the national income from Y0 to Y1. We will move from E2 to E1. Then at E1 we have excess demand for money in money market and equilibrium in goods market. In order to restore equilibrium in the whole economy, interest rate should increase to R1, and the national income would decrease from Y1 to Y2. The final impact of expansionary fiscal policy is the increase in equilibrium national income from Y0 to Y2. Here we find that the crowding out effect is less than before, which means that the fiscal policy is more effective. So when the marginal propensity to consume is high and when the investment is less sensitive to interest rate, we have less crowding out effect, thereby the fiscal policy is more effective. So when IS curve is relatively steeper than before, the fiscal policy is more effective. effective على إيه؟ على national income. بلاقي إن الزيادة في national income final change is high, or the crowding out effect is less than before. لو شفنا الجراف اللي فات هنلاقي من الواي نوت للواي 1 كانت مسافة كبيرة جدا، والكراودنج اوت افكت بيتقاس بالمسافة ما بين واي 1 to واي 2. هنا المسافة صغيرة من واي 1 لواي 2، المسافة صغيرة، ده معناها ان انا عندي less crowding out effect. راجع لإيه؟ راجع ان ال investment is less sensitive to interest rate، وراجع لان ال B value is high. In this case we have a steeper IS curve and the fiscal policy is more effective. Fiscal policy would have most effective impact on economic activity when investment is completely insensitive to interest rate. What does it mean by insensitivity to interest rate? It means that when interest rate changes by whatever percentage, investment will not have any response. This cause IS curve would be vertical in this case when H equals 0. H, it means investment sensitivity to interest rate. Starting point is at to when we have internal equilibrium in the whole economy, when we have equilibrium in goods market and the money market. The equilibrium or the initial equilibrium in national income is Y naught. The initial equilibrium interest rate is R naught. Now suppose that the government decides to increase the government expenditure or applies expansionary fiscal policy, IS curve would shift rightward from IS naught to IS1. The initial impact is at R naught. The equilibrium national income would increase from Y naught to Y1. It is a full multiplier effect. Here at E1 we have equilibrium in goods market, but excess demand for money in money market. This excess demand would put upward pressure on interest rate in order to restore equilibrium in the money market and in the whole economy. But the increase in interest rate does not result to any change in investment. Investment in this case is completely insensitive to any change in interest rate. Thereby, the national income would increase by full amount of simple multiplier. There is no crowding out effect. Here, the government's expenditure multiplier in ISLM model equals the value of full multiplier. In this case, the fiscal policy would have the most effective impact on the economic activity when IS curve is vertical, when investment is completely insensitive to interest rate. Turning to the slope of LM and the effectiveness of fiscal policy, we have taken that LM curve has three shapes. We have vertical LM, we call it classical range of LM curve. We have horizontal LM, we call it Keynesian range of LM, and intermediate range of LM curve, which has got a positive slope. And if the slope is low, we call it it is relatively flatter. And when the slope of LM is high, we call it steeper LM. So when money is more sensitive to any change in income, the value of K is high, and the money is less sensitive to interest rate, the value of M is low. In this case, the LM gets steeper, and the fiscal policy tends to have less effective impact on economic activity because the crowding out effect in this case would be high. On the other hand, when money is less sensitive to any change in income, K is low, or when money is more sensitive to any change in interest rate, M is high. LM curve has low slope, it gets flatter. In this case, the fiscal policy would be more effective on influencing the economic activity because crowding out effect in this case would be low. At the classical range of LM curve, money demand is completely insensitive to any change in interest rate. M equals 0, so we have vertical LM curve. Our starting point is at E naught, where the whole economy is at equilibrium, where we have equilibrium in goods market and the money market. Now suppose that government decides to apply expansionary fiscal policy, so IS curve would shift to the right. The initial impact is the increase in national income from Y0 to Y1 by full multiplier impact. So we move from E0 to E1. At E1 we have equilibrium in goods market and excess demand for money in money market. This excess demand would put upward pressure on interest rate in order to restore equilibrium in money market and in the whole economy. So when interest rate tends to increase, the private investment decrease by the amount just equal to the increase in government expenditure. In this case, the crowding out effect is complete. So fiscal policy in this case is ineffective. So when LM curve has vertical line, fiscal policy is ineffective on the economic activity. At the Kinsey range of LM, here we are talking about the case of recession, of having idle resources and a high rate of unemployment. Here money demand for speculation is high. We are talking about the case of liquidity trap. Thereby LM curve tends to have horizontal line. In this case, when the government decides to apply an expansionary fiscal policy by increasing government expenditure, IS curve would shift rightward and the equilibrium national income would increase by full multiplier effect, keeping interest rate constant or unchanged. Thereby investment will not be affected because interest rate is constant, so the crowding out equals zero and the fiscal policy is completely effective because the value of simple multiplier equals to the value of government multiplier in ISLM model. So when LM is horizontal, the fiscal policy is completely effective because the crowding out equals zero.